DLC SOUPED is a mod for Cuphead that is designed to be impossible. Well, not really, but just roll with it for now. A successor to the original SOUPED mod by Emil, this mod strives to buff every boss in the Cuphead DLC to the point of being unbeatable. Each boss fills the screen with dozens more projectiles than the original versions of the fight, with many phases being downright unplayable. This isn't unintentional, it's by design. For a certain point in time, the mod's developer, Morrison Jack, was the only person that has even defeated any of these bosses. Many other players have taken up the challenge, but eventually gave up. However, in the midst of all the failure, one player emerged victorious, not only managing to clear each boss, but even going so far as to complete them hitless. That player is me. Yeah, big surprise and whatnot. Overbloated intro aside, this mod is one of the first endeavors I've taken up over the course of my channel. My earliest clears date back almost 2 years ago, and there's a reason why I keep coming back to this mod, so you might imagine my surprise to learn that many other players don't see it the same way. As of editing this video, I am the only person that isn't the mod's developer that has actually cleared every single one of these bosses, so that's the reason why I'm making this video, and the 6 other videos that will be released later. I want more people to play this mod and see it the same way I do. Not as some unattainable, preposterous achievement, but as a new way to play Cuphead as a whole. So let's get into it, starting with Glumstone the Giant. Oh, also, there's this really cool red button that you should totally hit as it boosts engagement. Thanks for helping me out. I'm starting with Glumstone as he's the first boss I was able to S-rank. If you're thinking about playing this mod, I recommend you start with Esther Winchester first, as it's a much easier boss. A guide on her is right here. Right here. Oh, right, I probably haven't finished that video yet. Glumstone the Giant has by far one of the most impactful buffs, mainly due to the amount of different elements that are in the fight. To start this guide, I'll be talking about my weapon and charm loadout first, as they dramatically impact how the fight plays out. I'll then discuss each phase and its attacks after. This is probably the structure I'll stick to for future videos as well. Before talking about my specific loadout, there are some changes made to the weapons, supers, and charms that I always consider when designing a build, which you should too. First off, each weapon has a slight damage nerf, besides a few exceptions. Crackshot in particular has a much greater nerf, in both its cracked and uncracked state. Charge also has a nerf for one specific phase, and Converge gets a whole glow up that doesn't really change much besides making the unlocked version worse and the locked version better. The charms get much more impactful changes. Smoke Bomb has its dash distance shortened, similar to other mods of this caliber. Heart and Twin Heart have their damage reduction effects increased, but remain viable options. The same can't be said for Heart Ring, which requires you to get a lot more parries throughout the fight to get the full effect. The nerf renders this charm basically useless, as besides a few oddball cases, you're never going to use the effect of this charm to its fullest. Also, you won't get any extra super meter for parrying, which is just sad. Pea Sugar and Coffee remain unchanged, and Whetstone actually gains a buff of an additional 2 damage. Wow, 10 out of 10 mod right here. The 2 busted DLC charms, Divine Relic and Chalice, receive a much larger nerf. Divine Relic becomes practically useless, as its effect of combining all of her charms into one is removed, and the constantly swapping weapons are not a great enough benefit to justify using it. Chalice gets hit with the nerf hammer the hardest, and rightfully so. This character is a bit too busted in the original game. So to bring Chalice back to Earth, her jump height is shortened to closely resemble Cuphead's normal jump with a double jump. Her dodge roll is also shortened similar to Smoke Bomb, and her extra HP is removed. Also, when using the Shield Pal super, she receives a significant nerf in her super meter production, making it much harder to generate extra Shield Pals. All of her supers remain unchanged, making them and EXs more powerful in conjunction with the lowered weapon damage. Overall, whether you like it or not, these are the changes made to the weapons and charms in this mod, and they're definitely something you need to consider when designing your loadout. Sorry for yapping so much, but you're gonna have to get used to it. Now back to designing the loadout. First off, weapons. Pea Shooter and Spread are by far the superior options here. Pea Shooter provides solid consistent damage with its infinite range, and its EX is a solid source of damage for the final phase along with other use cases. Glumstone often sits far away from you, making it hard to deal damage with short-range weapons. For the moments when you can deal short-range damage, Spread is by far the best option, dishing out great burst damage. Its EX is bad, but does have one use in Phase 3 that is absolutely legendary. Both of these weapons also meet a certain other crucial criteria that I'll discuss later. The other weapons are pretty bad, but some do have niche use cases. Chaser and Crackshot have no real purpose in this fight, as they deal way too little damage to Glumstone's tanky health bar. Roundabout has a slower rate of fire, and requires you to look backwards for maximum range, both of which are detriments when the boss sits so far away and minions constantly cover the screen. Its EX is also a strict downgrade over P-shooters. Lobber is straight up unusable past phase 1, so just don't. Charge, despite its fair damage output, is much more likely to hit a minion, nullifying its damage. The boss also isn't that hard to hit with normal weapons, so Charge's only real potential purpose is speeding up phase 3. Converge is fairly interesting with its locked form, dishing out decent damage disregarding minions, but if you're not locking in, it's pretty bad. Twist Up serves as a good replacement for Spread, even being able to hit Glumstone from far away in phase 1 if you aim down and being excellent for phase 2. Its EX is also a strict upgrade, making P-Shooter Twist Up a good alternative weapon combo for this fight. For supers, the choice is pretty clear. Super 2, Invincibility, is the safest utility option and a great get out of jail free card for tricky scenarios. And believe me, this fight has a lot of those. The other two supers are pretty lackluster as you have no real need to deal burst damage in this fight, besides maybe in phase 2. If you are choosing one of the damaging supers, pick Super 1 for Cuphead and 3 for Chalice, as they have the ability to deal double damage during phase 2 if you line it up correctly. When choosing a charm, I decided that Whetstone is the best option. Most importantly, it lets you one-shot gnomes in both phase 1 and 2 with a single parry, which is a great way of clearing the screen of minions and opens a lot more dodging opportunities. It also helps dodge the bear in phase 1 and is great for dealing damage early on. All other charms are kind of good, but nowhere near as good as Whetstone, as is expected. Heart and Twin Heart are pretty good when starting out, and the damage decrease is manageable. Smoke Bomb is good for opening up dodging patterns in phase 1 and 2, but it's pretty bad for phase 3 with its shorter dash length. Coffee is good for a playstyle focused around popping Super 2 as often as possible, but overall is pretty mid. Chalice is also fairly interesting, as her double jump helps a ton with stalling in the air during all 3 phases, and her parry dash makes getting parries in phase 1 very easy. If you're using her, I recommend using the Astral Barrage super over the Shield Pal. P-Sugar, Heart Ring, and Divine Relic have no real practical use in this fight. Get used to hearing that in every one of these videos. Now that we've gone over the loadout, let's discuss the fight itself, starting from phase 1. Glumstone to Chance phase 1 is one of the most unique phases in the game, and Morris and Jack made sure to stretch its capabilities to the absolute limit. The arena takes place on a delayed spike floor of gnomes, which was changed to activate much sooner than usual. 5 platforms are situated on the arena, which have a chance of rising up at any point to mess with your positioning. The speed and rate at which these platforms rise up has also been increased. Once you have dealt a chunk of damage to the boss, a platform starts to lower before it is no longer usable. The platforms on the edges are always the first to lower, and one platform will remain until the phase ends. This platform will be rising up and down almost constantly, making it very unsafe to stand on. The boss also spawns 2 minions, a blue gnome that spawns out of the spike floor and shoots projectiles at the player, and a teal gnome that climbs up one of the platforms to hit the player. As expected, they spawn and attack much more frequently. Glumstone himself has 3 attacks that he will cycle through during the phase. His Cauldron attack involves him spawning a lot of fast-moving projectiles that are made harder to dodge when on the platforms. Their range does not extend down to the bottom of the arena, making the spike floor a relatively safe place to stand on. Glumstone's second attack involves him spawning a bunch of geese that cover the top half of the screen, the duration of which is extended from the original fight. While it is possible to stay on the platforms during this attack, the platforms can move the player up into the attack at any point. For his final attack, Glumstone carries a bear over to the right side of the screen, trapping the player in this small area. This is the only attack that Glumstone can't do right when the phase starts, meaning by the time Glumstone actually uses it, the rightmost platform would have dropped down already. This traps the player on the spike floor, meaning the player is forced to air stall in some way to avoid the spikes. Glumstone's face also gains a hitbox during this attack, making it so you can't stay right next to him while air stalling. That's all the elements of phase 1 covered, and put together they make for an incredibly hectic phase. Glumstone's main attacks, while not hard to dodge, section off large parts of the screen, making it much more likely you'll get hit by a minion or the spike floor. So how do you go about beating this phase? When thinking about dodging attacks in this phase, there is one clear factor that you have to consider before making any move, which is whether you're standing on the spike floor or on a platform. Both cases have clear positives and negatives to them. Standing on a platform means you're free to stand in one spot without having to avoid the spikes, while you'll have to worry about the platform you're staying on rising up at any point. This happens too fast to react to instantly, so your movement and positioning is at risk here. Standing on the spike floor ensures this will never happen, but you'll have to be constantly moving to avoid the delayed gnomes. Given the choice between the two of these, it's much more preferable to stand on the spike floor. The unpredictability of the platforms rising is too difficult to account for on the fly, which makes standing on them too risky. Two of Glumstone's attacks and the projectiles shot out by the blue gnomes don't even reach all the way down to the bottom spike floor, making it possible to wait them out completely while at the bottom. Knowing this, you can develop a fairly safe flow state whenever Glumstone is not using the bear attack. Just walk to the end of the arena, then do a low jump and dash over the spikes to start going the other way. There is one problem with this, however. Well, actually there's a lot of problems, but the main problem is the spawning of the blue gnomes. These guys are the main reason why we can't repeat our flow state over and over, as they can spawn at any point and are just tanky enough to be annoying, which puts you in danger of the spike floor. This is the main reason why we use pea shooter and spread, as both of those weapons have a high enough DPS to kill the gnomes without having to stop for long periods of time. The gnome spawning randomly means one could spawn right when you walk over it, which means you have to be on the constant lookout for their spawn animations. If you see a gnome spawning along your path, you can either dash past it and kill it on the way back, turn around and dash in the other direction, or slow down a bit and wait for it to spawn before killing it. Whetstone also one-shots the gnomes, so you can always rely on it whenever you're in a tricky spot. Another problem with simply walking along the bottom is that you're forced to make a jump at the ends of the arena, or when dodging a gnome, putting you at risk of getting hit by a cloud projectile or a teal gnome. To avoid this, I came up with an alternative dodging strategy, where you do a small hop and instantly cancel the height gain with a dash. This puts you low enough so that you avoid most projectiles, while also being in the air so you don't activate the spike floor. Once you fall down, you can start moving in the opposite direction, as the spikes you activated before the jump would disappear in time. This is generally safer than the other strategy, as you're not forced to jump over an already extended spike floor, giving you more room. One caveat of the flow state is that we aren't dealing as much damage to the boss as we could, so it's better to jump onto a platform once Glumstone has finished one of his attacks to deal more consistent damage. If you really want to deal more damage, you can also switch to spread and deal whetstone damage to stall in the air while on the right. Doing this allows for blue gnomes to respawn, so you should always aim and try to kill them with pea shooter if given the chance. Once Glumstone starts another cauldron or geese attack, you can descend the platforms by either dashing or dropping down onto a safe spot to re-enter the flow state and kill the gnomes. If Glumstone does the bear attack, you'll have to do a completely different dodging pattern. Since the bear practically forces you on a small area of the spike floor, air stalling is required for you to wait out the spikes. The simplest form of air stalling here is the whetstone variant, which involves you doing a full jump, parrying off Glumstone's face, performing an EX, and falling back down. Since Glumstone's face has a hitbox, you'll need to stop holding right when jumping to avoid it. Afterwards, the EX will push you back, and you can start holding right again to realign yourself before repeating the process. If you don't have an EX, you can simply dash whenever you're below Glumstone's face to avoid that same hitbox. This variation is the most optimal, as it deals the most damage and is the easiest to perform, giving you the most height out of any option. If you're not running Whetstone, you can air stall in a similar fashion with Miss Chalice, or by using both an EX and a dash when charmless. The bear attack now becomes one of the key ways we deal damage during this fight, further optimized with Calva swaps. The one caveat is that this attack lasts a while, letting a lot of blue gnomes spawn, so be sure to clear the arena before and after the attack. What's great is that you actually know when this attack is going to happen, as the way Glumstone chooses an attack is fairly predictable. At the start of a new attack cycle, Glumstone will choose whether he prefers the bear attack or the geese attack. After using said attack once, he will always follow it up with a cauldron attack. He will then use the attack a second time, and right after he will swap preferences and use the other attack, which repeats the cycle. So to give an example, if Glumstone currently prefers the bear attack, he will use it once, follow it up with a cauldron attack, use the bear attack a second time, and end with a geese attack. If he prefers geese, he will start with geese, follow up with cauldron, use geese a second time, then he will swap preferences, but will still use the cauldron attack because the bear attack is always preceded by it, and then use the bear attack. With all that said, that's all there is to this phase. There's a lot of optimizations that I didn't go over, but those will most likely come naturally to you if you play this fight enough. Since EXs are crucial for the bear attack, I don't really recommend popping your super unless you're in need of damage or you're in a tricky spot. I also recommend keeping a few cards for the most problematic phase, Phase 2. As you might have noticed, the spike floor does not disappear for this phase, although it isn't without changes. The spikes are now much more delayed, and will retract much faster, making it much easier to stand on the ground, thank god. During this phase, Glumstone's hand puppets will toss a ball at each other, which is sped up an insane amount. Fortunately, the ball's path can be predicted by both puppets' heights as follows. If the puppets are in the same vertical position, the ball will land in the middle. If the throwing puppet is lower than the receiving puppet, the ball will land closer to the throwing puppet. If the throwing puppet is higher than the receiving puppet, the ball will land closer to the receiving puppet. The exact positions of the ball and its trajectory depend on the puppet's specific vertical position, but generally you want to avoid being in the middle. You also want at least one of the puppets to be higher up, which makes the ball travel higher. Standing underneath this puppet will give you more room to jump, dodge, and deal damage, so getting underneath the optimal puppet is our main goal during this phase. Of course, it's not that simple, as there are a lot of gnomes that pop out of the ground and get launched right at the player, and I mean a lot. Making sure to dodge each individual gnome is hard enough as it is, but combine it with the fact that you constantly have to keep moving to avoid the spike floor and have to pay attention to where the puppets throw the ball, and you've got a deadly phase. Fortunately, the gnomes have a fairly predictable movement pattern, which is that their flight paths land them directly on top of the player. This can be taken advantage of, as you can simply kite all the gnomes into the same spot, and then move out of the way right after. This makes the gnomes easy enough to dodge while on the ground, but their paths are still fairly unpredictable while in the air. This is a problem as you will most certainly be forced to jump into the air to avoid spikes, so to dodge this, you can do a precise dash through the gnome's flight paths to make it out of the spot safely. If you're running whetstone, you can also parry gnomes just below you so as to not have to worry about them entirely. Now that we know how to dodge both the gnomes and the ball, let's look at the general strategy for this phase. Throughout the phase, you will be most focused on the positions of the hand puppets. Since the gnomes can be easily baited into one spot and then dodged, you can walk along the floor while locking in place every few steps to get this motion. This is the slowest you can move without the spike floor catching up to you while still baiting most of the gnomes into one spot, and is also optimal for dealing damage with pea shooter. If you see any gnomes spawning in front of you, you can either wait them out, jump past them, or western them as they spawn, similar to phase 1. This is how we'll be getting from one edge of the arena to the other, as remember, it's safest to stay right underneath one of the hand puppets while a ball is being tossed. The puppets will enter a cooldown and change the positions right after tossing the ball, so this is your time to move to the other end of the arena. You want to do this as slowly as possible, since moving too fast will end with you being trapped on the edge of the arena. This is bad, as now that spot is where all the gnomes will be targeted, and dashing backwards out of that spot to avoid them will lead to an interception with the ball. It is safest to go to the opposite of the arena most of the time. The only time it's not safe is if you'll end up next to the lower hand puppet, while the other hand puppet is higher up. This gives you practically no room to dodge, so if you see this happening, you can turn around and dash sooner than expected to go back towards the more optimal puppet. There is also a chance that both of the hand puppets won't update their positions after tossing the ball, which results in them tossing the ball much earlier. This can mess you up if you're going particularly slowly, so just try to react to the ball as fast as you can if you notice this happening. Despite me laying out my full strategy for this phase, it's still incredibly tough and requires practice and incredibly fast reaction time. There's no real consistent strategy for this phase, so practice is recommended to familiarize yourself with your reaction patterns. This phase is also why I chose to run the invincibility super, as it's a great way of avoiding damage whenever you're in a tough spot and don't know what to do. As I've already said, this is by far the hardest phase of the fight, so I recommend saving most of your health for it. Once the phase ends, the spike floor will finally vanish, but any gnomes you were standing on top of while this happens will instantly extend and then retract again. To avoid this, just make sure you're in the air and land on a safe spot while the spike floor is retracting. Afterwards, phase 3 will begin. The very start of the phase is your best opening to deal damage, as Glumstone's ulcer stays completely still during the starting animation. If you have any supers or EXs you saved for damage, use them now. The phase itself is situated atop an acid lake with 5 platforms that will disappear if the ulcer spits a chicken wing onto them. If the ulcer spits out a bone, the platform will disappear and become parryable, respawning all over platforms. The rate at which the chicken flies and the platforms disappear has been dramatically increased, with it being possible for there to be one platform remaining. On the edges of the arena, gnomes will pop out and spit darts at the player's current vertical position. All in all, this phase is simple enough to understand and dodge consistently. The only real thing you have to look out for are the gnome darts while jumping, but even that can be easily avoided if you kill the gnomes beforehand. What's not so simple is actually damaging the boss. The ulcer has 800 health, which isn't that much compared to the earlier phases, but it gets pretty big when you can't land consistent bullets. The ulcer moves from one end of the screen to the other at an incredibly fast rate, making it hard to target him. What's worse is that when standing on the middle platform, P-Shooter can't even reach him if he's on the very edge, which is where he spends most of his time. It is possible to reach him by jumping to a closer platform, but that's not always possible and is also way riskier, as the center platform gives you the most amount of movement options once platforms begin to fall. Had you done the Herculean task of completing phase 1 and 2 of Chaser, it would be pretty useful here, but more often than not it's going to target the diver nodes instead of the boss, and by itself it doesn't deal as much damage. However, we can deal a lot of damage to him if we use EXs, specifically the P-Shooter EX. It deals a consistent amount of damage, has a big hitbox and enough range to hit them at the edge of the arena. We can supply these EXs through parries, as the gnome darts and chicken wings have a decent chance to be parryable when spawned. I generally like to use EXs when jumping over a dart or two, as that will dodge them completely while also baiting any future darts to the top of the screen, above where you normally stand. Using an EX right after a parry has a similar effect and is very safe. If there aren't many platforms remaining or I'm in a generally tough position, I prefer to aim at the sides of the screen to kill gnomes right as they spawn to make the future bullet hell much easier. But yeah, rinse and repeat this enough times and you should be good enough to beat this phase and the full boss. That's all I have to say for this fight. There's a ton of minor strategies and optimizations that I didn't go over in the interest of time, and they're not particularly noteworthy anyway. Of course, you can't expect to master this fight just by watching this video, and you'll still need to practice and experiment with it to become consistent at the fight. This video only serves as a starting point so you aren't completely clueless. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you thought, and if you ended up beating this boss or maybe even S-ranking it, let me know in the comments. I'll be very happy to hear it. Lastly, make sure to check out the original mod creator, Morrison Jack, and show him some love. The mod's still currently being developed, so subscribing to his channel will keep you notified of any updates. You can also subscribe to my channel, I guess. It's the least you could do if you want to support me. Anyway, that's it for me, and I'll see you later.